We're talking to John Stapleton, who is a journalist and writer. He's written 7 books. One of those books is Chaos at the Crossroads, which was a book about the shocking, abysmal reality of family law in Australia. John's experienced this as a single dad himself. Not only that, he also helped run and pioneer the longest running dad's radio show, weekly radio show in the world. It's still going today, I believe. Dad's on Air. It started in 2000. He left in 2010, 2011. Others took it up, thank God. John is a journalist for 25 years with the Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald. He's written so many different things. He's done so many different things, and he's got so much wisdom and expertise. Today, I'm interviewing John because I want to run the Dads for Kids executive summary of our submission to the current legislation, Family Law Amendment Bill 2023. We put in a submission into the draft ideas back in February, and now the Senate inquiry is calling for submissions. John, it's great to be talking to you today.
Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Indeed. We believe the process of reform for the Family Law Amendment Bill 2023 is immoral. There's been no broad community consultation. It's been rushed, ill-considered, some of it self-contradictory. There's been no provision for a conscience vote. And since 1959, the Matrimonial Act in 1959, every major legislation has had a conscience vote. So we believe this is immoral. It's partisan and it's dividing Australia, and it's quite shocking. And furthermore, there was no mention of this in the last election. What are your thoughts about my comment here, John Stapleton?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there was absolutely zero election prior to the election in 2022. There was zero mention that Albo, the Prime Minister, intended to take family law back to the dark ages when most fathers entering the court literally never saw their children again. The statistics bounce around, but one statistic I saw was that 70% of fathers who entered the court rarely, if ever, saw their children again. They would sometimes get fortnightly custody, but that usually deteriorated very quickly, and they would often see their children only once a year, sometimes even less. It's a barbaric tragedy of a court, and I think there's a very strong movement for it to be abolished completely, that it is beyond redemption. It sets couples up against each other. It is a massive cash cow for lawyers. It's the trail of damage that is left by the court is just mind-blowing. We did a book in 2010 called Chaos at the Crossroads, and if you don't mind, I'll just read a couple of paragraphs what the conclusion of that book was, because a massive amount of work and a massive amount of research went into this, and what we're seeing now is a repeat of history, and those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it, as the saying goes. Do you mind if I do that?
I think it'd be very good, John. Very, very good.
Okay. The book concludes that successive governments from both left and right have failed to listen to their constituents and respond to their concerns. They have resorted to vested inquiries in the hands of the mandarins and publicly funded elites whose feigned attempt to listen to the views of ordinary people have then been heavily reinterpreted. They have delayed progress through the extensive manipulation of committees or other forms of alleged inquiry. These same governments, even when they were enacting legislative reforms, left their enforcement in the hands of institutions notoriously resistant to change. They allowed or encouraged fashionable ideology, institutional inertia, and bureaucracy to triumph over common sense. Common decency was lost long ago. In terms of human suffering, the Australian public has already paid dearly for the failure to reform outdated, badly administered and inappropriate institutions dealing with family law and child support, and for the future failure of governments to take seriously the experiences and voices of the men and women most directly affected by them. The country's failure to reform family law and child support is ultimately a failure of democracy itself, And I really wish to add one comment about this current inquiry. In 2003, John Howard, then Prime Minister, announced an inquiry, got huge coverage. His polling went straight up because there's a huge reservoir of discontent with this jurisdiction. Many people have been badly damaged, both men and women have been very badly damaged by this utterly dysfunctional jurisdiction. And they held inquiries all around the country. You would remember you participated in them,
Correct.
where all sorts of people, earnest, fathers, grandfathers, children of divorce, hundreds of people contributed to that. You know what happened to that report? In the final summing up, that entire report, which cost millions and millions of dollars and travelled all around the country interviewing all sorts of people, some bureaucrat dismissed it in one sentence. That the inquiry found that those appearing before the final report found that those appearing before the inquiry were more concerned with their own issues than with the welfare of the child. Bang! Millions of dollars wasted. They ignored everybody. All those people that were broken-hearted in the witness, as they gave evidence. People were in tears. Men, women, children. It was just unbelievable. So I believe, and history will demonstrate, that this inquiry will be just as pointless. Why does nobody know about it? I bet you if you go out there and ask 1,000 people, you would be lucky to find a single one of them that know that this government is holding an inquiry into family law. Bet you. Nobody knows about it. It's being held in secret because it's, dirty business.
It's dirty deeds done dirt cheap, as AC/DC saying, eh?
Except it's not dirt cheap. Costs a damn fortune. These mandarins are pulling, vast amounts of money. The grants that fly everywhere. Look at all the legal aid, the women's feminist, the legal aid groups for women. They're all extensively funded. Look at all the researchers, all extensively funded. It's costing a fortune. And where's the men's voice? Nowhere. Poor old Sue Price at Men's Rights, right? Her
Yep.
and her husband set up a group because they ran a tyre business and they noticed that a lot of their staff were really distressed by family law and child support to the point of being suicidal. So they set up this little group. It's an unfashionable name, Men's Rights. But anyway, they stuck to the name. So she had a little chat to Michaela Cash, the alternative Attorney General, who, in the rate Albanese's going, she'll soon be the Attorney General, but that's by the by. So she had, as she's perfectly entitled to do, had a chat to the alternative Attorney General, and word got out of this. She put up rather proudly on her website that she'd had a discussion and they seemed to understand at least some of the issues. So the newspapers picked this up, no doubt at the behest of some, good feminist bureaucrat, and she was pilloried as being a far-right group, men's rights far-right group. Poor old Sue, she's a widower now. Her husband died. She's 77. She's in a wheelchair. These are these dangerous men out there, the far-right group. And the poor love has spent decades fighting on behalf of men. And she's the one they ring up. This is how I met her. I rang up from work, really distressed, in tears, absolute nightmare of family court proceedings, and just talked to her, and she listened to me. And as the years evolved, I came to use her as a source to get quotes. She's one of the more common sense figures in the whole thing. And there she is being pilloried as a far-right, dangerous far-right male activist, a 77-year-old woman in a wheelchair. Oh, give us a break. I mean, it's just beyond absurd. These people cannot cope with the idea that there might be someone out there that doesn't agree with them. They just can't cope with it. Unbelievable. Where's the public debate? Where?
It's crazy.
Crazy.
So you would agree with that? You would agree with our point one, that this process, the actual process of reform, which is no consultation, no conscience vote. They didn't announce it in the last election, and as you say, they're seeking to divide men and women and pour petrol and fuel on the gender war. Comment.
Oh, totally. I mean, totally. Yes, we're going over the same ground, but it definitely was not mentioned in the previous in the election campaign because at least I was smart enough to know that it would be highly unpopular. People are fed up with it. It's also because we now have race at the heart of Australia, with the boys, extremely racially discriminatory. Because, for instance, groups like Muslims will go nowhere near the court. They already have codified in their beliefs a way of dealing with separation. They think it's very unfortunate, very pro-family faith, but in the unfortunate circumstance where marriage breaks down, it's all codified for them. The child lives with the mother until, if memory serves, 7 years old, after which it will go to the father or the father's family. Ditto the Sudanese, for instance, where we have quite a significant number of now. They don't have a traditional nuclear family structure. The child shortly, very quickly ends up living with the mother's brothers. It's just not the nuclear family that we have in the West. And so on. It's only the Anglos really that battle it out with lawyers at 100 paces, and it really impacts badly on lower socio-economic groups, particularly who are ill-equipped to deal with this, with the court, with all the submissions and the affidavits and court appearances and all the rest of it that one's expected to go through. They're just totally ill-equipped to deal with it. They don't have much experience with lawyers or courts to start with. They're not particularly articulate, and the idea of having to write an affidavit, but Your Honour, she's a ... it's more the go, and so it's just, it's absurd. Whereas the upper class and the upper middle class are all, they split their houses. You can have the holiday home, darling, I'll keep the one in the city. You can have the Porsche, I'll keep the Audi. Oh yes, of course the kids can come over to your place, during the breaks from Cranberry or wherever. The upper class deals with this very differently to the poor who are out there squabbling and so on. You also see these heartbreaking cases to this day
Indeed.
of fathers, I'll finish on this, but of fathers who believe they're entering a genuine court, like where truth will out. They don't understand the history of the court. It's essentially a Marxist feminist jurisdiction, that truth is of no consequence, that there is only one desired outcome, and that is sole mother custody, and that it acts as the core basis for welfare dependency. It is the core underlying legal framework which fuels an entirely massive industry of welfare dependency and single mothers groups and so on and so on and so on. The fathers get absolutely nothing. If they nick themselves in the shed, well, there goes one.
John, people who say that only 3% of cases, it's apparent, it's a proven statistic, that only 3% of cases are actually decided in the family law court. But I think you and I would agree that the reality is the family law court actually sets the tone for how disputes, matrimonial disputes and family separating will actually be adjudicated, even informally, because 97% of people don't go to court. So therefore, it's very critical that the actual family law court actually does have some grounding in fairness and equality and treating people in a proper way. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh yes, fathers just give up. I mean, not many people can afford to pay, the lawyers $500 to open an envelope and all the rest of the garbage that they go on with. It's a hugely expensive process, hugely intimidatory, and if a lawyer has any decency, they soon tell the father that there is no hope, and it's a very unfortunate, but there is no hope. If you wish to pursue it through, a lot settle at the door, at the door of the court, as the saying goes. But you're right, it's the framework, and very soon they realise that they have absolutely zero hope. And really, that was why the whole push to shared parenting originally was so important, that it set the overall frame that you're both parents, you both made these kids, you both, and look at fathers now, they're so involved in their children's lives. You're you see them down the mall, you see them everywhere. They love their kids, they're really actively involved with their children. They're not from our era, my mum was always, wait till your father gets home, that sort of era, you'll get the thrashing of your life. That was the 50s. Whereas now the fathers are deeply involved with their children, and then the minute there's a breakdown, you're tearing the kids away from them. It's harmful to the kids, harmful to the parents, and happy parents make happy kids. I mean, oh, the whole jurisdiction is an absolute debacle, a shameful debacle. We really there was some hope that when it got folded into the federal court, it would become more of a normal court, but from the stories I hear, that's not the case. It's a mess, an absolute mess, a shameful, disgraceful, harmful, destructive mess.
Well, John, the government claims with this current Family Law Amendment Bill 2023 that this is a minor reform, but they're going to throw out every recommendation for shared parental responsibility that was made in the law in 2006, which did see some minor change in a better direction. What is your comment? I believe this is immoral because they're actually telling us a lie. What are your thoughts?
Oh, completely. I mean, I was very critical of the previous reforms because they were so modest and I thought, and so easily overturned, which is now proving to be the case. But nonetheless, yes, it sets the framework. So you are basically assaulting separated dads in this country who are already extremely distressed, and you're telling them they have absolutely no hope and essentially that they will lose their children. Now, fathers are biologically programmed to protect their kids, and to tear them away from them, as this legislation does, is just disgraceful. And no, it's not a modest reform. It sets the entire tone for another huge war on dads. It's disgraceful.
The other thing, John, and you're quite an expert on this, the ideology behind the family law changes in 1976, and even the most recent change, a lot of the recent changes, and particularly this bill, comes from a man-hating, father-hating position. Can you explain to people exactly why that's the case?
Well, it was a fairly radical ideology in the 1970s. I did philosophy at university, and every year we had to write an essay about this same book. It was called The Dialectics of Sex by Shulamit Firestone. And now her theory was that the only way we could become, women could become a pure form of themselves was to eradicate all men from their life, any vestige of the patriarchy, that men really needed to be taken completely out of the equation. We are descendants of that really radical ideology. A lot of young women now, they get on, they're used to being treated equally. They don't want to wage these old-fashioned gender wars, these dinosaur wars. They're perfectly happy to get along with it. This is a really old-fashioned ideology which really needs to be swept into history.
100%. And to say that this reform promotes the best interest of the children is a lie, because it actually takes away this shared parental responsibility, which was, in a sense, at least tenuously, connecting men and women, fathers and mothers, to their children, because it's every child's right to have an equal relationship with their mother and their father in the event of divorce and family separation. But these family law amendments will actually take all that information out of the law, strike it out of the law, and it's going to remove any possibility, I believe, of children having a fair, truthful relationship with both their mother and their father, which you and I both know from all the social science shows that they need. Your comments, John, as we finish.
Well, the best interest of the child is just a legal fiction, which allows much jousting in family court. and between them. And of course, there's, months or sometimes years of toing and froing between the lawyers. The best interest of the child is just fictional. It depends entirely. What you're accusing both parents now of not being interested in the welfare of their own children. What is the best interest of the child? And the court invariably rules against the male. So they're accusing, the entire population of fathers in this country that they don't have the best interest of their child at heart. It's just ludicrous. And the best interest of the child is one of the single most abused phrases in the whole of Australian history. I mean, it's just absurd, beyond absurd. It's sad. If it wasn't so sad, it would be farcical. And of course, academic after
I was
academic
just thinking,
made a fortune out of it.
yeah, I was just thinking, John, how to describe this particular legislation to the average person, and I would describe it as a children's nightmare from hell, because every child wants to have a relationship with their mother and their father. Inevitably, they're brokenhearted when their mother and father announce a divorce, and they don't want to have to choose between their mother and their father. They want to be able to have an equal relationship with both their mother and the father, even if it means going from house to house and seeing their mother at certain parts of the week and their father at certain other parts of the week. Children actually want that, and so these new amendments, as I said before, will take that information out of the law, the shared parental responsibility, arguably a presumption of shared parental responsibility. You and I wanted a presumption of shared parenting to uphold the rights of the child, but we got something much more watered down. But to take it out of the law, to my mind, it's a bad law, it's a bad system, but it's going to make a bad system 10 times worse. Your comment as we finish.
Well, exactly. I mean, the advantage of the shared parenting ideal was not that exactly split things down the middle, but that parents, adults, are forced to act like adults and uh, and reach agreements that work for them and for the kids. Kids change as they get older, parents change as they get older. Mummy gets a new boyfriend, daddy gets a new girlfriend. All those sorts of life things do happen, and these things adjust. They, instead of acting like squalling kids in a yard flinging lawyers at each other, um, they have to act like adults. You guys once loved each other. Surely you can reach some sort of agreement over the best way to go forward. And the presumption of shared parenting meant that responsibility went straight back onto the parents. They had to work it out. And it also meant that both could have jobs. Who wants to be a single mother stuck at home 24/7 looking after kids? I mean, that's a really old-fashioned piece of ideology as well. Not does it just fuel massive welfare dependency and is therefore hugely destructive on the bottom line, but it's yes, both parents can work. One has different shifts, different days, all the rest of it. No one who wants to be a single mother, honestly. It's ridiculous. And there's almost invariably, and we haven't even mentioned this, is that you're not just trying to deny the father contact with the children, but the grandparents and all the other relatives that are linked to the father. You're denying them essentially half their life, half their biology, half their upbringing. And those grandparents who then suddenly aren't seeing their grandchildren are equally um, heartbroken about the whole rotten, dismal process.
John, as we finish the day, you mentioned you'd like to read one of those cases. Could you tell us one of those cases?
Right. Well, this whole family law reform business, which first began in 2020, also began just as there was new technology. Suddenly, people could go online with forums and email groups and all the rest of it, and they could share their experiences. And so the court's arbitrary and cruel judgments became the stuff of legends by the time we first began broadcasting Dads on the Air. One Indian immigrant was jailed for writing it to his parents in English. The court ignored the protestations that his father had two master's degrees in English. So this poor Indian chap, who I've got the documentation, he was heartbroken. His parents both had degrees in English, and he wrote to them in English. The judge decided he should have written to them in Hindi. The court has ordered litigants not to contact the United Nations with their concerns, not to publicise the injustices of their case in any way, and not to take their children to a doctor or raise welfare concerns. One father was ordered not to contact his children after he allegedly carried his daughter around on his shoulders in a crowded park in a suggestive manner. I met that father too. Another father who expressed a desire to see his adolescent son after the boy's suicide attempt was ridiculed from the bench. I was in the court that day when that happened. I've never seen anything like it. Yet another was jailed for sending his child a birthday card. That's what this government wants to take family law back to. Shame on them.
100%. John, it's a great pleasure to talk to you, and I just want to say a huge thank you, and I appreciate all you do. And you've got a new book coming out this week. What's the name of it, John?
Australia Breaks Apart. Huge amount of work went into it. So, yes, you can. You should be able to buy it. The digital versions are already available, and the hard copy should be available over the next 24 to 48 hours. And if anyone reads The Weekend Australian, there's an extract in there.
So John's latest book, Australia Breaks Apart, is actually now available, and you can pick it up online on Kindle the next 48 hours, 24, 48 hours. Australia Breaks Apart. Again, thank you, John, for talking to us today. Appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having me, Warwick. All the best.